there's a lot of empowerment and kind of removal of like self blame or self criticism that happens because so many times these patients have been going to their providers and being told, like you said, your labs are fine, everything's fine. You just need to try harder.
Welcome to MyMD Unscripted, where healthcare gets personal and the script gets tossed. I'm Dr. Clint Carter, ER doctor turned direct primary care freedom fighter, on a mission to challenge how our healthcare system treats patients in America. In every episode, my expert guests and I dive into real conversations about what's broken and how we can fix it by making healthcare about people, not just managing disease. It's time to rethink what healthcare should be and how we can make it better together. Welcome to the podcast. Hello, and welcome back to MyMD Unscripted. I'm your host, Dr. Clint Carter. Thanks for joining us. We have a friend of mine from a past life when she was in Charismatics with us. Lyndsey Perrin is a physician assistant who is going to have a lot of insight for us today. It's pretty exciting. She spent 10 years doing hospitalist work and ICU work. And then at some point, which I can't wait to find out when, she decided that she was out of that game and she started her own gig. So, Lyndsey, thanks for joining us. I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little better. But the question I want to ask leading into this is, what if someone's genetics could be the key to unlocking disease before it even happened, or really unlocking wellness and preventing disease before it even happened? So with that, introduce yourself a little bit better and let's roll.
Sounds good. You did a pretty good job. So I don't know that there's too much to add, but my background is traditional hospitalist, ICU, critical care medicine. Did that for about 10 years after PA school, and kind of the timing of that 10-year mark was right around COVID, which was, everybody's favorite time to be working in the hospital or in medicine in general.
It
So
was a great time to burn out for sure.
I think I was already, there was very little candle left to burn at that point. I was working night shift and was kind of unaware initially of like was taking off my body, all that stuff. But yeah, so basically came to the conclusion that if the system wasn't going to change in the setting I was in, that I was going to have to do something different. So kind of took a risk and opened a practice initially doing aesthetics that transitioned from that very quickly into kind of wellness, functional medicine, and now genetics.
Well, okay, perfect. So was it after COVID sometime that you decided to make the jump? What year did you get out?
Started like forming the business in 2020 and opened like January of 2021.
Okay, so you didn't waste any time. You're like, this is for the birds.
I was doing both for a while. So.
Oh, well, yeah. You got to pay the bills. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, no, it took 2 years of working full-time ER and full-time this before it paid its own payroll. So yeah, I'm with you on that. The joys of business ownership for sure, right? So what was that? Take us back to that moment. Like, what was the moment that you decided there's got to be a better way?
I think it was kind of seeing how the hospital system was treating the medical providers.
Yeah.
It was like, kind of worst case scenario. There's literally a global pandemic and, you're laying off staff, increasing required hours, nurses and respiratory therapists getting hazard pay, and it was just like, it's just too much in my face. I can't ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, if you wanted to do anything outside the box to help any of these patients, you can't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the government won't pay us and therefore we won't get paid. So you won't get paid. So yeah, it was a very eye-opening experience. I think there was a lot of curtains pulled back, if you will. You couldn't help but pay attention to the man behind the curtain after a while. I love that. Well, okay. So what about you went from that to aesthetics to some wellness, because you're like, wellness matters. Aesthetics is actually, I feel like, kind of on the spectrum of wellness, right? You got to look well and feel well. How did you end up making the jump into genetics? How did that happen?
So mostly it was, I always practiced aesthetics, I think, very differently than a lot of aesthetic providers did. It was very clear to me that so many of my patients were coming to me with external symptoms of internal issues,
Yep.
uh, whether that be, metabolic, hormonal, psychiatric, all of the above. And so my I basically just wasn't willing to keep putting band-aids on things. And so
Yeah.
that caused me to dig a little deeper and dig a little deeper. And I feel like most of the time where that currently the options stop, at the functional medicine level. And not too long after kind of getting exposed to, how surface level traditional medicine is, I got sick. And it was very obvious to me that I knew better than to go to traditional medicine. And that as sad as that
Okay.
is, I knew what they would tell me. You are, tired, you're a mom, you are overworked, it's stress, it's perimenopause, or all of the things that we get told. And so I went and saw a functional medicine provider. And
All
this
right.
like, provider did genetic testing, and my life was forever changed. I also could never practice medicine the same after that.
Yeah, we've had a guest on that does genetic testing as a big part of what he does, Dr. Keeley in Chicago, and he was awesome. And I had him do I got jealous immediately. I was like, but I want to do that. That why
You
am I not
can.
doing that? That's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And so then I had him do mine on air, and of course, a 25-minute podcast doesn't do justice to going through
Yeah.
someone's genetics, I'm sure. But it was fun. I was not surprised that I wasn't nearly as perfect as I'd like to put on. But
Totally.
I love that like once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. And so it was your health journey that brought you to a functional provider who opened the door to genetics, which pushed you away from aesthetics more even deeper down the wellness rabbit hole with functional medicine and genetics in particular. So did you just at that point when you did that, you had your practice, it was up and running?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to start incorporating that kind of stuff into your practice?
Pretty much immediately. I kind of used it as like a guinea pig situation. The more I learned about genetics, the easier it was for me to connect, all of these issues that patients were coming to me complaining about with, you know, potential genetic predispositions. And I remember in the beginning when I, was questioning myself and whether I knew what I was doing at all, I would just take little notes on the patient's chart of like my guess of what their gene mutations were going to be. And, you know, now being able to get the majority, if not all of them,
Wow.
predict is mind blowing. Because I knew nothing when I first started. We don't learn this in school. There's no genetics for functional medicine
No.
fellowship, that I know of. And so, yeah, it was just a huge learning curve. And so I kind of used my patients as guinea pigs and just kind of explaining my thought process. I've always been, super transparent, and my patients are, very comfortable with me. I'm maybe a little bit more vulnerable sometimes with them than other providers. And, it's like, hey, I don't know everything, but I'm learning this. And, would you be interested in kind of looking into it? And the response was not what I expected in a positive way. And basically our whole practice transitioned to doing that.
So genetics kind of becomes the cornerstone of what you do, and from a preventative medicine standpoint, which is how you make people feel better now and later. So once you get their DNA, tell me what happens after that. How does that change what you do for them clinically, and what's your process?
So I think this is kind of where I saw a huge gap of in the current way that genetics is being incorporated, if at all, in any type of healthcare, is either patients are getting cancer genetics, you know,
Yep.
a few handful of genes, or specific kind of genetically inherited diseases, or they're getting these reports from companies that are 500 pages long with, SNPs and RSIDs and, effect alleles, and no one knows what that means. I didn't, it's like, yes, we learned
Yeah.
that in school, but like to use that on a day to day and then to
Yeah. What
expect
does that?
um,
What? How does that change what I do, though? I have no idea what that means for me.
And
Yeah.
so that was where I saw the gap was what's the point of giving patients, all of this information and just overwhelming them, giving them data overload. And so at our practice, we've always been really heavy on patient education. I'm always known for like drawing my silly graphics. I make all these, you know, graphics. I'm a very visual person, so I feel like it has to,
Yeah.
you know, other people can't hate my graphics. Maybe they do, and they just don't tell me. Um, but yeah, so basically trying to translate in very simple terms, not only what their results mean, but then, like you said, what do I do with this? Because with these reports, you get, 20 recommendations related to diet. It's like, well, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
I'd be like, That's a lot." And that's what a lot of, patients kind of who had done other genetic testing elsewhere were like, yeah, I have this report, and they'd bring it in, and they're like,
Yeah.
I put it in a folder and never thought of it again.
Well, and these same patients come to you and they're like, yeah, but I went to my regular doctor and they said my labs were normal, but I feel terrible. And, I don't want to get out of bed in the morning and I'm, whatever, fatigue, depression, all the things. Right. And so you come in and you're providing this extra insight into the why. And so how do you you take that patient with quote unquote normal labs at their regular doc, add on the DNA, and then you guys jump from there to plan of some kind. What's the next step?
Yeah, so we basically look at with their genetics, we like to look at systems as a whole instead of looking at specific genes, by themselves.
Yeah.
A lot of people have heard about, like MTHFR, for example. People will be stressed out if they have a gene mutation, but there's an entire methylation pathway.
Yeah.
And if you have, one gene mutation in MTHFR, one of the SNPs, versions of that gene, but the rest of your pathway is not an issue. Why are we worried about that when,
Yeah.
look at your detox genetics, non-methylation related, and that's clearly the weakest link. And so that's what we try to do. We kind of try to look at systems, figure out where the kind of biggest bang for our buck is and focusing recommendations, care, and we start there. And it also depends on where the patient's at the time. A lot of these reports that you get are recommendations not knowing anything about the patient. And if the patient's coming to you saying, you know, I'm fatigued or my hair is
Yep.
falling out or, whatever it is, then we can get specific with what's going to be the biggest impact for them, first.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Daniel did mine, it was like, yeah, I know that I'm MTHFR, heterozygous for one gene, but he's like, yeah, but you lost the COMT lottery and you got some, detox issues and, hormone, it was kind of all of it. Hormone metabolism, that kind of stuff. He called me fat. He said that, I genetically, I'm like, yeah, I never was the skinny kid. Dadgummit. Um, but it was really insightful in that 25 minutes of him just really having to skim the surface because that's what we had time for to start. It's one of those things that, as I'm looking to this business, but also grow locations and my attention is spread out so far. It's one of those short list of things that I want to add to the practice sooner than later when I have the bandwidth to do so. But what's one of the most surprising things that you've found with, sitting with a patient and they're like, it blows their mind or the best sort of all you gotta do is this life altering, information. Give us a couple patient interactions where it was just surprising or fun to see.
Truly, it ends up being all of them. But especially in the beginning, kind of as I was learning it, kind of experiencing those aha moments with patients, there's a lot of empowerment and kind of removal of like self blame or self criticism that happens because so many times these patients have been going to their providers and being told, like you said, your labs are fine, everything's fine. You just need to try harder, try something different, try harder. And, a lot of times we're talking about patients who were exercising 7 days a week for 2 hours, you know, cutting their
Yep.
calories, doing all of these things. And then to be able to look at their genetics and see, like, you have horrific autophagy genes, and essentially like your cells are full of trash, and then being able to work on that first and they're finally losing weight, even it almost like gives them permission to like trust their gut instinct that they knew that they were trying as hard as they could.
Now, I can only imagine that it fills so many blind spots inside of, what regular medicine's able to do. I mean, that's kind of the story that I had when I got into functional medicine at all. Just doing, like bioidentical hormones. It was like, you
Mhm.
got these women and they're 45, go to the gym 5, 6 days a week, look great, feel terrible, and I was like, I can only touch, you know, from the outside looking in. I'm like, well, even with regular labs, I can see your hormones this and thyroid that, or, the things that I can touch. But the genetic testing gives you a whole, just a cheat code to know where they're, the, the blind spots in their DNA that's making it an uphill battle for them that you can give them a head start on. That's so cool. I imagine that that has quite an emotional impact on your patients when they sort of touch, like when that really starts to sink in.
It does. I mean, that was probably one of the more surprising, but also, I don't know, most rewarding part of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
I've had patients who a patient who was, struggled with addiction her whole life
Yeah.
and had gotten clean, but there was a huge amount of, kind of self-inflicted, basically self-hate and blame.
Yes. Yeah.
And when I got her mental health genetics, it was like the most horrific neurotransmitter situation I've ever seen. And I was like, I'm not sure how anyone with these genetics would not, have an addiction problem. And she just burst into tears. And it was like you could tell this just like weight was lifted off.
Yeah.
Then being able to translate that into, okay, so, we found the weak link here. How do we optimize it? And so once you
Yeah.
know exact gene mutations or weak spots or weak systems, you could look at, okay, well, do you have a problem making dopamine? Do you have a problem transporting it? Do your receptors suck? Or do you just break it down way too fast? And there are very different approaches to how you would handle all of those. A stimulant medication, for example, for somebody with ADHD is just going to give you more dopamine. But what if their receptors suck? Can you do something for
Yeah.
the receptors? So it's just a very different way of kind of looking at how to solve the problem.
Clinically, how do you sensitize somebody's dopamine receptor?
There's a lot of Parkinson's medications that are kind of geared
Okay.
for that.
Right
Um,
on.
so a lot of people will use off-label
Yeah.
medications, but a lot of what helps.
That's
So if
awesome.
I see often like people who have a hard time making dopamine, you can put them on, like an L-tyrosine supplement
Yeah.
that helps. For example, with the serotonin side of things, right? You're looking at SSRI medications. You know, every other person that comes into my office is either on one or has been on one. And what that does is just going to basically recycle the serotonin in the synapse. Um,
Yeah.
but what if those people are really, really bad at making serotonin? What if we just helped them make more? Is there something that would work better for them than just recycling the little amount that they have?
So how do you do that?
It depends on their genetics specifically. You can do like a 5-HTP supplement
Yeah.
that will help them make it, but it
Yeah.
depends on if they have which step there's a weak link. And you can get that
Right.
granular in the process.
Well,
It's
and the MTHFR, going back to some of that, the methylation pathway, moving to the hormonal pathway that moves to the neurochemical pathway. So yeah, I mean, that all makes sense. And then I think, probiotics, bacteria make a crud ton of serotonin
yeah,
that can
that's
be absorbed into the
a
system.
whole another podcast.
So it's a whole nother, yeah, the gut's a whole nother podcast, but that's a pretty fun, yeah, I hadn't even given it that kind of thought. Wow. Okay. So I guess it's pretty easy to say that it would be pretty hard to go back into regular medicine at this point, right? Like, you should probably memorize the Matrix scene better. Like, once you take the blue pill, there's no
Yeah.
going back, whichever color, I think blue. Um, but okay. So for the patients listening, in your practice, this proactive, personalized care. How does that work at your place? Like you're located in Georgetown outside of Austin, Texas. I assume you do some virtual work?
We do. Yeah. Currently throughout Texas, but expanding hopefully in the near future. But we get a
And
mix.
so what does that look like on a day to day for someone who's interested in getting this information and potentially working with you? How does that work?
So we have a couple different ways that we've gone about it. We've had so much interest in what we do from out of state that we try to create kind of a starter program that can kind of help give our version of those genetic testing results in a way that is more useful, more actionable, more
Yeah.
education focused. And so we created a program where essentially patients can order a test and then they have access to educational program that teaches them how to interpret their own genetics that we created. So that
Okay.
definitely helps as like a starting point, especially for
Yeah.
people who are kind of want to dip their toe in the water and aren't exactly sure, like, well, what's this all about? But then, for other patients, we do the genetic test. We do kind of like an overview of results of kind of like this. We find the big weak spots, but it's way too much information to go over
Yeah.
and, one even 90-minute appointment. And what we found is that kind of the most successful patients in making real lifelong change are the ones that we gradually go over new information at each visit. So we're kind of, you know,
I
your
like it.
your biggest weak link was, inflammation, but inflammation is now down. And now, your next concern was hormones, was good, your genetic hormone cascade, how you metabolize hormones, all that.
Oh, I love that. I mean, so yeah, you just because I would be tempted to give it all to them and then try to focus on something, but their brain is all over the place.
As
Um,
as a patient who had that
yeah,
happen to me, I mean,
yeah,
I was a provider, seeing a provider, and I like almost burst into tears. I was like, this is the most overwhelming, you know, what am I supposed to do with this? And I was
yeah.
fascinated.
Oh, I can only imagine.
But yeah, so in the beginning, I was referring my patients out because I didn't, I was like, oh, someone else knows how to do this. And they were all coming back and they're like, we're never going back there. It's like,
No.
I don't know what to
Yeah,
do with this. Can you tell me what to do? And I was like, okay,
yeah.
I actually have to learn this and look into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if you've got a program that sort of dumbs it down for them as much as possible before the start, like you would for your, say, out of state folks or something, who, that kind of thing. That at least gives them something to look at for a starter, for sure. Okay. Well, gosh, I love your approach. I was jealous of Daniel. I may be more jealous of you. I'm not sure of getting to start with where the holes are in the foundation and then repairing that as we build the house. That's really, really fun. So if someone, wants to reach out to you, how do they go about doing that?
Probably the easiest way would be through social media. Our Instagram handle, I'll send it to you, but it's get.well.again.
I,
But yeah, whether it's, kind of doing what I was explaining, like a starter kind of tiptoe into the information that you can receive from genetics to those who are like, already know that this is what they're looking for. They haven't got their solutions anywhere else. There's so much that can be optimized and prevented when you know where to look. So, an example I give to patients a lot of times is, you know, we do screening colonoscopies, but what if we were looking at someone's genetics and they had very low risk of colon cancer, but they had incredibly high risk of Alzheimer's? Would that change what we focused our preventive attempts on? And I think that kind of thinking about that, it changed the way I approach preventive or proactive healthcare.
well, I mean, come on, insurance pays for colonoscopies and it doesn't pay for Alzheimer's, prevention. So that dictates what we do, right? Um, so we're so far outside that box. It's great. Now we're just sitting with patients one on one, taking them to the next step. directing truly personalized medicine, which is so fun. I'm jealous of the DNA part, and I totally otherwise get where you're going and this personalized medicine approach and spending time with your patients. I love it. What's, as we kind of rapid fire out of here and we kind of close it down, these a lot of times we'll ask questions like what's one supplement you recommend the most, or a lifestyle habit that makes the biggest difference. But the way that you practice medicine, it totally depends on their DNA.
You know what I'm
uh,
now, probably.
yeah, it's too customized. Why would I don't have to guess, I just tell you, your biggest problem is blah blah blah, so we should blah blah blah. So what's one wellness myth that drives you crazy?
Oh,
Something that if you could just like make it go away would make your life and your patients' lives a lot better. And there's so many to choose from, I'm sure. But you have one?
probably one that I'll probably get some pushback on is the exercise recommendations. That's something that I definitely changed kind of my thought process on after looking at the genetics. It's amazing how inflamed some people can be and know it. And that's why they're inflamed. They're not able to lose weight. So they're exercising. The problem is when the body's inflamed, your body's focused on trying to put out fires.
Yeah.
And in that context, exercise can be another fire for your body to try to put
Yeah.
out. It can kind of be counterintuitive, counteractive. And so it's amazing how much success we can have by not starting with the exercise intense immediately and really working on calming the inflammation down, giving them the support that their genetics show that they need so that when they do go back to exercising, it's not, a negative impact on them
Right.
and doing what we want it to do.
That's awesome. Not at all what I would have thought you said, but that makes sense. And definitely I've seen exercise be inflammatory for folks, but it's always trial and error from our end. And for you to be able to predict that is cheating, but awesome.
I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Yeah, man. If you're not cheating, you're not trying in this situation. That's awesome. Okay. Well, all right. So, Lyndsey, this has been awesome. It's inspiring both for me and for the listeners out there. So, we're going to put in the show notes how to get a hold of you. Your practice is virtual statewide. Outside of state, you've kind of got an automated program where they can just run their labs and get some information. Anything else you need to share and send us off with?
I mean, I just appreciate being able to talk about it because, like I said, once you see something with new eyes, especially in the practice of medicine, there's not a ton of us out there. I think there's more and more of us, as we go along, can't ever go back to doing what I was doing and being able to explain the why behind that. Health
Right.
empowers, other providers to dig a little deeper and know that like maybe traditional medicine doesn't have all of the answers that we thought, but there are other options out there.
I'm so impressed with the guys in this and ladies in this town that do pretty darn good job with the time they're given and the toolkit they have to work with. I'm like, I got so many more tools to work with, and I get
Mhm.
an hour at a time with every patient. It's not a fair fight, but it's impressive what they can pull off. It's not enough. They're not satisfied. They know that it's not enough, but what else are they going to do? They don't know. They're as stuck as the patients are. They'd
Exactly.
love to go deeper. They just can't.
Mhm.
And so whether it's, hormones, peptide, functional, DNA, all the extra tools that are out there that change lives, make people healthy, make them feel better, keep them feeling well and healthy for a long time, longevity, quality of life, all these things that, you just can't do from a regular practice. I absolutely would be a terrible doctor if I had to go back into the system and
Yeah.
start seeing patients in a regular. Right, I would be so bad at it.
Yeah.
I, I
I
it'd be time to go, and I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. It's crazy.
I would not be getting started
So
because, my patients' appointments would run over. It would be a mess.
that's right. Oh, my waiting room would be terrible. It'd be terrible. I just prefer to practice without a waiting room. That has worked well for me. But it. Thank goodness for a business model that allows it, and thank goodness for providers like yourself that are staying curious and want to do better and refuse to not do better. It sounds like you were pretty burned out and pretty broken and running out of options other than starting out on your own. I think that's how definitely my situation was. Like, I was going to quit. So
Yeah.
might as well try this, one
Might as
last
well.
ditch effort. But I love that you're doing all the right things for all the right reasons. And thanks for coming on and sharing it with me and my audience. And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. It's great talking with you, and hopefully it was of some benefit to someone who might have their candle as low as mine was for quite a while there. So
Absolutely. And, this is going to air on around January 1st of 2026. So it's a great time for folks to decide they want a new direction on feeling well and being healthy and a new year. So what better time to reach out to Lyndsey and let her help, show you the holes in the foundation that you're building on. So
yeah.
thank you again for coming on. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you information on a promo code so people can get a discount to start the year off right. So
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. A promo code should be in the show notes. If there's not, bash us hard, but we'll make it happen. That's awesome. Thanks. Appreciate it.
absolutely. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining me today on MyMD Unscripted. I hope today's conversation opened your mind and inspired you to imagine a better path for your health and therefore life. If you found value in this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone passionate about transforming healthcare. Real change starts with real conversations, so let's keep them going. Until next time, stay well, stay curious, and never stop pushing for better.